Hello and welcome to Strathmore's first online workshop series for 2018. My name is Kelly Eddington and today's project is a limited palette portrait. My cousin Tyler Sharp and his wife Natalie Walker are professional photographers, and they took our reference photo of a young woman named Kayla. We're going to make toned paper like we did last time, but with a twist. First, you'll need to draw Kayla, just basic outlines with no shading. And I think you should draw a little darker than usual for this. Not super black, but definitely dark enough to see easily. The reference photo is available on the instruction sheet you can download from Strathmore's website, along with a template if you need help getting started. Today we'll use masking fluid instead of white paint to create highlights, and you'll have to do this step next. I'm using two tools to apply the masking fluid. This is an awl I bought for a couple of dollars at a hardware store. Its metal tip is actually too sharp to use easily, but it works great when I keep its blue cap on. I'm putting masking fluid wherever she's whitest, and that includes the whites of her eyes, their sparkles, that white dot on the tip of her nose, and the highlight in the center of her lower lip. Don't feel like you need to get an awl. Use anything small and pointy, such as a toothpick. Please know that masking fluid will ruin any paintbrush, so use one you don't mind messing up and save it for future masking fluid projects. So there's her face with minimal masking fluid. Again, just put it where you see white highlights. Next, I've got my masking fluid brush, which is bigger than the awl, and I'll use it to create highlights in her hair. This will be sort of hard to see because the fluid pretty much matches the paper. But if you look at the photo, I think you'll see where I'm going with this. Kayla has really pretty blonde hair, and blonde hair gives you an incredible range of values from white to very dark. I'm putting the fluid where that light is hitting her, and I'm brushing it on in the direction that the hair has been arranged. So that means I'm painting along curves. I'm putting the fluid on solidly on the brightest highlights and using a lighter touch on the borders of those shapes. Barely dusting the masking fluid onto the paper will create more natural looking hair. The hair below her neck is pretty complicated. Do your best to isolate the highlights and feel free to simplify the shapes if you're overwhelmed. Once again, I am making my own toned paper with watercolors. I'm using one of my biggest brushes to do this, and I've mixed my yellows together, and now I'll drop in orange to make a color that will read as the light gray of her skin. Feel free to mix a few colors of your own choice and add a fair amount of water to them. Then paint them all over the surface of your paper. I'm strategically avoiding putting lots of dark paint on her face, but there is still plenty of pigment going on. It will dry a few shades lighter in any case. I'll tip the paper to even out the color, and I'll use a paper towel to soak up any puddles that form around the edges. I'm working on Strathmore's 400 series watercolor paper again. The paper is on a block, which means it has adhesive all the way around it, so I don't have to tape it down. If your paper is not on a block, you'll need to tape your paper securely to a board before you start. I'm adding some final color here with a smaller brush. And here's what that looks like when it's dry. Give it at least a few hours to calm down. Color choices can make a difference in the mood of the painting. Here's my first attempt with blues. I was happy with it, but I had a technical problem with my camera, so I started over with the yellows and oranges. Okay, let's start painting her. You can see where the masking fluid is now, and after making sure that this is dry, I'm removing the masking fluid from her face, working gently and carefully. I can still see my drawing. Sometimes the paint can make it hard to see. As you remove your masking fluid, start thinking about what your darks are going to be. You'll need to choose one or two colors that will be substantially darker than what you have now. It's up to you. In the past, I've gone with more intense versions of the same colors I used, but sometimes unrelated colors can be fun. For this, I'll use a mixture of purple and orange. I like those colors because they play well with each other. My purple is very dark and almost black at its most intense. When I mix it with orange, I get a lovely warm brown. And the orange, which is cadmium red light, is my favorite color, and it adds just pure fire to anything it touches. So here they are both together, and I'm using a small number 1 round brush to start defining her eye. Use the right brush for the job. If you're painting something small, you need a small brush. Bigger, looser things need a bigger brush. I don't have much water on my brush, and I'm using really the smallest amount of water possible. I want the paint to flow, but I also want to stay in control here. She has unusual, very light green eyes that seem to glow, so the light yellow I have is about all I need. I've outlined the iris with some of that dark color and have given her a dark pupil. The corner of her eye near her nose is pretty dark, and on the other side, the shadow of her hair curves into her eyelashes and down her cheek. Her eyebrow is lighter than her eyelashes, and you just see a bit of it here. The lashes are a solid dark shape with just a few curved lines coming out past it. I'll finish with a few dark areas. I always start a portrait with the eyes. I feel like if I get them right, the rest of the painting is a snap. But if the eyes are messed up in a way that's impossible to salvage, what's the point in painting everything else perfectly? So the pressure is on at the beginning, but if I do a good job with the eyes, I can relax. This other eye is on the dark side of her face, and a dark shadow is swooping down from her forehead and temple, and it'll take over the left side of the eye. So that's why I've painted the white corner of her eye a dark purple. I've outlined her iris and given her a dark pupil as well. She has a visible crease between her eye and eyebrow, so I've painted that, and I've given her a shadow under her eye, leaving a little highlight beneath her iris. There's her eyebrow, a little more orange, and it's darker as it gets closer to that shadowy area. I'll go over her lashes and other dark parts again. And looking at the two eyes, yeah, I'm feeling good about the way this is going. I still have a lot more to do, obviously, but I'm going to move on to her nose and get that started. So there's a suggestion of a nostril, just a couple of lines. And then after the small stuff, you're going to have to be brave and get ready to lay in some big shadows. And just like that, we have a nose shadow. I'm using a number 4 round brush. It holds more paint, but it's still small enough to give me a sense of control. I've painted some water to the left of this shadow, and some of the paint will flow down into the center of her cheek. And there's the start of the eyeshadow I was talking about, along with that really dark one on the side of her face. I'm warming those up with some orange and infiltrating her forehead with it. The shadow continues down her chin and above her lip. We have now reached the awkward stage of the portrait. Things are looking a little weird, but don't panic. This paint fades and you will have plenty of time to tinker with it. Look at this super dark color I'm putting in. The damp paint around it will help it spread in a way that will look soft. If you notice an annoying line developing where the wet paint meets the dry paper and you want to soften that line, you can use a dry brush to soak up and blur the line, or else you can use a damp paper towel to control it. I'll do that to the line on her forehead. Just a bit of water and blot. Her lack of a mouth is bothering me, so I'm giving her a top lip using more orange than purple, and then it looks like her nose is distracting me. Anyone who's familiar with my watercolors knows that I work in multiple layers or glazes, and I often paint over the same area 4 or 5 times to get my colors as intense as I want them to be. This painting is no exception. Watercolor takes patience, but the fact that the colors fade as they dry kind of keeps their intensity under control. You really have to work to make a mistake that's too dark. I've given the bottom lip a purplish shadow, and I'm starting to create some roundness by leaving the yellow and white part alone. The purple seems like it's overtaking the orange, so you'll see me try to make the shadows warmer periodically. I'm going to spend the next 30 seconds or so adding some rich purple shadows to places on her face where she's darkest, particularly her mouth. I like to define the line between the lips in my paintings, but I'm not going to use a thick, unchanging line here. I'll make the left side thicker than the right side because there's more light on the right side. Also, once I paint something dark on one of the features, suddenly the others don't look dark enough, so I tend to adjust the shadows on all the features every time I paint something new. Let's move on to her hair. I really want to paint that shadow to the right of her chin, and just like that, she's not a floating face anymore and she has a neck. My goal with this step is to simply figure out where all the darkest parts of her hair are, and I'm painting them with a larger brush that can hold some paint. This is mostly purple here. I've painted her face in a tight, realistic way, and to contrast that a bit, I'm painting her hair a little looser and more quickly. You'll notice that I haven't removed the masking fluid yet. I still want to protect those highlights from some of the darker paint I'll layer on top of them. The masking fluid is helpful in that it lets me know where I am in the painting. I'm mixing some more of my dark color, and I'm moving up to the top half of the painting. I think most painters will do this naturally, but in case you're having trouble, it helps if you're painting in the direction that the hair is arranged. We're not painting every single strand here. With hair this complicated, it's best to simplify the shapes and concentrate on the darkest, lightest, and medium values. We already have the highlights, and the color of the paper becomes the medium values. I think that's what I like the most about this project. Before you even start painting, 2 of your 3 main values have already been taken care of. I put some really dark purple shadows on the left side, and am doing some sketchy lines on her shoulder. I'm very happy with the way this painting is coming along. Figuring out the hair is such a relief. In the reference photo, you can see how the black background bleeds into her hair, and I've mixed a lot of my dark color and am filling in that section on the left so it becomes part of her hair. Then I'll do the same thing on the right side. I'm not looking to make that black background super dark or flat in my painting. I kind of like the random watercolory effects the paint just naturally wants to make, and it adds some interest to the background. While that background dries, I'm going to deepen my shadows in and around the face again. I'm going to get nervy with that orange too. As I said earlier, if I paint something dark, it helps me see things I need to adjust elsewhere. And the amount of orange I've got going on in the background makes me want to add it to her face too. And I continued to go over things until I decided to put my paints away for the day. Sometimes it's nice to see a project later with fresh eyes. The next day was cloudy, and you can see how it affects the light. After being away from the painting for a while, I am dying to get going on it again. I'm removing the masking fluid from her hair, and for the most part, that's what I'll be working on for the rest of the painting. And there's Pooge, my kitten. She'll be watching off camera for a while. I love having her around. Okay, back to work. I've turned my palette around so I can reach the purple more easily, and using my number 4 round brush, I'll get in there with some of my darkest hair shadows. People sometimes ask me why I keep my palette on the left of my painting if I'm right-handed. It's hard to explain, but I feel like I can see my paints better. When the palette's on the right side, my hand blocks my view of them, so it's a little more work for me to have the paint on the left, and my hand blocks the camera in awkward ways sometimes, but that's why. I just want to see my paint. Her forehead looks too big and needs some more shadow coming in from the left, so once again I'm going over it. And since her face seems to have become the place where orange goes to die, I'm adding quite a bit of it, and that's better. And let's give the cheekbone and the shadow to the left of her nose some orange too. While I'm at it, I'll add some to her brow bone. Eventually, I'll warm up the chin area and define the space between her nose and mouth a little more. When I was just learning how to paint portraits back when I was a teenager, for the longest time all I did was paint with 1 or 2 colors on white paper. I was just getting used to the way the paint behaved, and if you are new to watercolor, I recommend you do that too. Full-color portraits are incredibly difficult for beginners. The paint can be unpredictable, and so using a limited palette can give you some confidence before you branch out and use more colors. There's a sort of traffic jam of hair near the bottom of the painting, and I'm doing my best to sort that out. Again, just try to simplify what you see. Don't worry about the hairs that seem like they're out of place. Concentrate on the bigger shapes instead, and try to determine if an area is dark, light, or something in between. Curls on blonde hair have all 3 of those values going on, and that's why it's the most challenging and rewarding hair color to paint. I'm continuing to add color and interest to the hair, including some extra orange on the left side, and I've got a little more work to do on the curls in the lower right. When people watch me paint, they often say, "I wish I had your patience." And it's true. You've got to have a lot of patience when you're a painter. I've sped this video up 6 times, so you can imagine how slow this can go in real time. To keep myself amused, I listen to music and podcasts. Pooj likes to mess with my earbuds too, of course. Okay, I'm getting ready to switch to my old fuzzy brush. It'll help me integrate the highlights with the rest of her hair. See how the borders of those white highlights are a little harsh? I'm going to soften them with the screwed up bristles of this brush, which you've seen me use in earlier videos. By lightly brushing along the edges of those shapes, the random bristles create a believable hair texture. I use this brush for so many things: fur, grass, stubble, and any number of other textures. There, not so harsh anymore. I'll continue to use this brush throughout her hair, just anywhere those white highlights seem too severe. Sometimes I'll use mostly purple and other times mostly orange. This part is really fun to do, and if you don't have a brush like this, you can pinch the bristles of whatever brush you've got and coax them to separate temporarily. It's kind of awkward painting like that, but it's doable. If you'd like to get a pre-made messed up brush, you might talk to your local high school art teacher. When I was a teacher, my students messed up brushes so quickly it made my head spin. Donate some money to your teacher's art supply fund, and I'm sure they'll be happy to give you a brush or two. I'm using that same brush to add some interest around the outside edge of her hair. I'm making some flyaway hairs that are a shade or two darker than the background, and then it's time for some finishing touches with a regular brush. I've added some darker colors to her earring, and as I'm studying this eye, I'm noticing that I've been skimpy with her eyelashes. She needs some more. In general, eyelashes are the last things I add to an eye after all the skin and creases behind them have been painted. I'm using my number 1 round brush to add thin individual lashes where I see them happening above and below her eye, actually on both eyes. Then I'm going to add a few more wrinkles to her lips. Those are vertical curved lines, just a shade or two darker than her lip color. If you've painted along with me for all 4 of these lessons, wow, I really want to thank you for participating in this workshop and for having the courage it takes to try something new. I hope you've enjoyed these 4 projects, and maybe you have an idea or two about what you'd like to explore in depth, whether it be portraits, still life, or landscapes, or maybe something else altogether. Here's my finished portrait of Kayla. I'd like to thank Strathmore very much for asking me to do this, and I invite you to join me on my YouTube channel, Kelly Eddington Watercolors, for more tutorials, and check out my instructional watercolor pads I created for Strathmore's Learning Series. Thanks a lot for watching, and please show me what you've done.